Hundreds of people are attending the first funerals of the 11 victims of the IRA's Poppy Day bombing. The first ceremony going on now is for the youngest victim, the student nurse Mari Wilson, who died in the rubble holding her father's hand. Services are also being held for the RUC reservist Ted Armstrong and the retired policeman Sam Gould. Enniskillen is at a virtual standstill, with shops, schools and offices closed as a mark of respect. One of the few places open, the bank, which is taking in money from around the world for the appeal fund.
The town of Enniskillen was in mourning today for the victims of Remembrance Sunday. At the War Memorial, they were removing the last traces of the murderous bomb attack, launched without warning by the Provisional IRA. The streets were still and eerily silent. Every shop closed as the town paid respect to the victims. Brief handwritten notices on every shop front, bearing witness to the outrage felt by every part of the community. The RUC and the Army were out in force this morning, checking the routes to be taken by the funeral processions of the 3 victims to be buried today. Sniffer dogs were used to check for explosives. At the Methodist Chapel in the centre of the town, the service for the youngest victim, 20-year-old Marie Wilson, a nurse at the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast. Friends and relatives arrived early for the service. All the schools in the town have been closed to allow the pupils to attend. Marie's coffin lay in the church overnight.
I will be seeking to express almost an impossible task humanly, to express the sorrow, the heartfelt wave of compassion that has risen out of this incident. And with God's help, I hope not only to minister to the Wilson family alone, but to all who have lost loved ones and have been injured, and minister to the whole world in a way that their thoughts and prayers are with us at this time.
How will Marie be remembered by the community?
She'll be remembered as a loving, vivacious, vital girl, full of compassion, full of life, and it is her spirit that I trust, with God's help, will live on in this community.
The crowd spilled outside onto the pavement, watching as the Wilson family arrived at the church. Marie's father, who was trapped in the rubble with his dying daughter, said that he had prayed for the bombers and already forgiven them. The hearts of the whole community went out to the family. David Chater, ITN, Enniskillen.
Boycotted by unionist councillors. This report from David Chater.
This morning, a special meeting of the town council, called by the Sinn Féin chairman to coincide with the funerals, was boycotted by unionist councillors.
On behalf of Sinn Féin, I want to offer our sincerest sympathies to the bereaved and injured, and wish those injured a full and speedy recovery to health. This council represents the broad spectrum of political opinion in the county. It is inevitable, therefore, that there will be conflicting analysis in any discussion on the causes or consequences of social disorder in our country. Speaking for Sinn Féin and on behalf of the Sinn Féin group of councillors, I repeat Sinn Féin's assertion that Britain can never be a force for peace in Ireland.
The Sinn Féin statement came only an hour before the funeral procession of the RUC reservist Edward Armstrong, passing the memorial where he was killed by the explosion now claimed by the Provisional IRA. David Chater, ITN, Enniskillen.
Town in mourning as the first victims of the Poppy Day massacre are being buried. Shops and businesses, as well as Catholic and Protestant schools in the town, are closed as a mark of respect. There's a strong security presence, and earlier police searched premises along the town centre route. Today's 3 funerals will pass. Going on around now is the funeral of nurse Mary Wilson, and among the first to arrive at Darling Street Methodist Church was her father Gordon. As well as Mary's, the funeral of RUC reservist Edward Armstrong is taking place at Scots Presbyterian Church. Retired policeman Samuel Galt will be buried this afternoon after a service in St Macartn's Cathedral. The funerals of 6 of the victims will take place tomorrow. Georgina Quinton will be buried after a service at Garvery Presbyterian Church. The funeral of Kit and Jessie Johnston will take place at Scots Presbyterian Church. Wesley Armstrong and his wife Bertha will be buried after a service at Darling Street Methodist Church, while John McGaw will be buried after a service in a funeral parlour in Ballymena. William and Nessie Mullen will be buried on Thursday. Mary Wilson was the youngest victim of the Enniskillen massacre. 20-year-old Mary was a student nurse at the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast and travelled home to Fermanagh at the weekend to attend the Remembrance Day ceremony with her father. Mary was an enthusiastic member of the Royal Victoria Hospital Choir, and last night her friends and colleagues interrupted rehearsals to pay her a special tribute.
Mary Wilson loved music. When she became a student nurse at the Royal Victoria Hospital 2 years ago, she immediately joined the hospital choir. She appeared on Ulster television singing Christmas carols. Last night, on the eve of her funeral, the choir met for its weekly practice, but many of her friends were too upset to attend. The conductor, Dr. Michael Swallow, paid tribute to her.
I'm sure everyone here would just want me to say how sorry we all were to hear about Mary Wilson, one of our altos. I think I should just ask the choir to stand just for a moment in tribute to her, if you wouldn't mind.
Mary had been due to start work in Royal Maternity yesterday. Her friends and colleagues thought highly of her.
She was an excellent nurse. She had all the qualities that one looks for in a young nurse. She was loyal, enthusiastic, caring. I could go on forever. She was a very nice, lovely personality.
And what kind of reaction has there been in the hospital today to news of her death?
Well, I think really one of shock and great sadness. Sadness that we've lost such a girl with such potential, because she really had a wonderful future in front of her. Mary was just a really nice girl who was just full of life, and she really put everything she had into anything she was involved in. I knew her through the Nurses Christian Fellowship and also through the hospital choir, and she was just such a lovely girl to know and to work with and to know socially as well.
Police investigating the Enniskillen massacre have issued a further appeal for information. They particularly want anyone who attended bingo at St Michael's reading rooms on Saturday night to come forward, as well as anyone who was in Belmore Street on Saturday or Sunday morning to contact detectives at Enniskillen or use the confidential phone. The Catholic Bishops of Ireland have declared that membership of or support for the IRA or other paramilitaries to be a sin. In the strongest statement they've ever issued, they say the Catholic population of Ireland is revolted by the Enniskillen bombing, the O'Grady kidnapping and other recent paramilitary activities. The bishops say it's now a clear choice between good and evil. There is no longer any room for romantic illusion. We sympathise with police forces north and south and call on our people to help them bring the guilty to justice.
Armstrong. Mourners heard Presbyterian moderator William Fleming say it was everyone's Christian duty to live within the law. The family of the youngest victim, 20-year-old student nurse Mary Wilson, were in a sombre mood as they set off from home to the Methodist Church in Darling Street. Her father, Gordon, still nursing an arm injury suffered in Sunday's bomb attack. The Wilsons were regular churchgoers. Mary's mother was the church organist, and the congregation expressed their sadness for the family's loss with wreaths, each adorned with personal messages of sympathy.
The Secretary of State, Tom King, has had talks this morning with the Chief Constable, Sir John Herman, and senior army officers to discuss security in the aftermath of the Enniskillen bomb attack. Money has been pouring in for the appeal fund launched yesterday for the victims of the explosion. The fund opened today and will be boosted by the amateur video man who recorded the aftermath of the bombing. Raymond McCartney says he'll give some of the money he'll get for his pictures to the fund. The address for donations is the Ulster Bank, 16 Darling Street, Enniskillen. A spokesman for the bank has said there has been a good response. And the police in the Republic say a lorry driver who was detained and questioned at
hours after the explosion at the War Memorial, the townspeople made their way through Enniskillen's silent streets to attend the first of the funerals of those who died. Mr. Gordon Wilson, who was buried with his daughter under the rubble, set out from his home with his family to be at her funeral service. Murray Wilson was the youngest to die, a nurse looking forward to her 21st birthday. Prefects from the grammar school she'd left not so long ago were among the congregation that filled the Methodist Church for the service of thanksgiving for her life.
Being of such a radiant, lively personality, she had immediate rapport with all the patients that came under her care. Her friendliness, her sense of humor, her sincerity won for her many friends among staff and students. We all have received so much in the brief 20 years of God's love through her radiant, caring, loving personality that Gordon and Joan, Peter and Julianne can say today, the Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord.
As the mourners made their way to the services this morning, the local council was holding an emergency meeting. It was boycotted by the Ulster Unionists, but Sinn Féin and SDLP councillors stood for a minute's silence before the meeting was adjourned.
The townspeople of Enniskillen began a dignified day of mourning solemnly and largely in the privacy of their own homes. The security forces had the deserted streets to themselves as they checked all premises along the route to be taken by the first of the funerals. Enniskillen is completely closed down. Everyone in the shops and offices of this country town want to demonstrate publicly their respect for the 11 victims. Today, the process of adjusting to a new, scarred reputation begins for a town that was insulted by the horror of the Remembrance Day bomb. The rubble at the site makes a permanent reminder. Some essential repairs had to be completed before the funerals could begin. Council workmen were able to clean the war memorial for the first time since it caught the dirt and dust of the explosion. Soldiers carefully followed the funeral route through the town centre. A Labrador trained to sniff out the smell of explosives trotted between the shop doorways. By now, the first of the wreaths were arriving at the Presbyterian church. The council, controlled by Sinn Féin, had been summoned for a special meeting to consider, said the letter, matters arising from the bombing. The Sinn Féin chairman, Paul Corrigan, had prepared a statement, but the 8 unionist councillors pointedly boycotted the session called just before the first funeral. Those councillors attending did stand silently for a minute as a mark of respect, and afterwards the council chairman avoided all attempts to elicit an apology from the political wing of the IRA. He was prepared to read a new statement, the one he'd read to the council.
The IRA have accepted responsibility and have expressed their deepest regret at the catastrophic effects of this action. On behalf of Sinn Féin, I want to offer our sincerest sympathies to the bereaved and injured, and wish those injured a full and speedy recovery to health.
But this wasn't to be a day of political bickering in Enniskillen. It was a day of mourning.
The Northern Ireland Secretary, Tom...
The cortege of the first 2 of the 11 victims of the Remembrance Day bomb passed through them. The first was that of Mary Wilson, the youngest to die, a nurse looking forward to her 21st birthday. A service at the Methodist Church brought hundreds to join in a celebration of thanksgiving for her life. The body of Edward Armstrong, a member of the Royal Ulster Constabulary's full-time reserve, was carried by his colleagues past the spot where he died. He had survived a terrorist mortar attack which wrecked Enniskillen's police station, only to die at the hands of terrorists 2 years later at the age of 52.
Today, the process of adjusting to a new, scarred reputation begins for a town that was insulted by the horror of the Remembrance Day bomb. The rubble at the site makes a permanent reminder. Some essential repairs had to be completed before the funerals could begin. soldiers carefully followed the funeral route through the town centre. A Labrador trained to sniff out the smell of explosives trotted between the shop doorways.
A man has appeared before Bristol magistrates charged
security. At 2 o'clock, a service was held for 49-year-old Sam Galt, the former police sergeant who died in the attack. Two of the other victims, 20-year-old Mary Wilson and 52-year-old RUC reservist Constable Ted Armstrong, were buried earlier.
Mourners filled the silent streets of Enniskillen today as the funeral processions of the first two victims of the Remembrance Day bomb passed through them. First was that of Nurse Mary Wilson, at 20 the youngest to die. At her funeral were most of the colleagues she trained with at the Royal Victoria and Mater hospitals in Belfast, as well as many old school friends. The body of Edward Armstrong, a member of the RUC's full-time reserve, was carried by his colleagues past the spot where he was killed. The 52-year-old man had survived a terrorist mortar attack on the police station 2 years earlier, only to die at the hands of terrorists on Sunday. The Chief Constable, Sir John Herman, was among the mourners.
Almost 1,000 people held a vigil at the cenotaph in Dungannon as a mark of respect for those who died in Enniskillen.
He was married with one son. The third funeral was for Samuel Galt, who was 49 and a former police sergeant. 19 people injured in the bombing are still in hospital.
It was a day of mourning in Enniskillen as the town began to bury its dead. The carnage of the War Memorial bomb caused widespread revulsion and brought condemnation and sympathy from world leaders. This morning, the aftermath of the atrocity was still there to see. In time, the rubble will be cleared away and new buildings may go up. The physical scars will eventually disappear. The scars of the mind will probably never go away. At first, the streets of Enniskillen were deserted, except for police and soldiers. It was their job to check the route of the funerals. Sniffer dogs were used by the army. Shops and offices closed as a mark of respect. Gordon Wilson and his family buried 20-year-old Murray today. On Sunday, Mr. Wilson lay amidst the rubble of the explosion. His daughter lay dying beside him. She squeezed his hand and said she loved him. At the local Methodist church, tributes were paid to the young nurse.
She glowed with life. She had a real caring personality. She brought sparkle into our lives. She brought sparkle into all our lives. She had a real caring concern for people. For people. Mary loved her family. It was a wonderful day for her when she was bridesmaid at her brother Peter's marriage to Ingrid. She later made great friends with her two young nieces, Eloise and Judith. But her caring friends reached far beyond the family circle. It was her caring, her willingness to take time and to show love that led her towards nursing as her vocation.
The funeral of Mary Wilson went to Brendrum Cemetery on the Tempo Road. She was the youngest of the people who died. On Remembrance Day, Reserve Policeman Edward Armstrong was at the War Memorial to honour the dead. Today, he was given full police honours. His 16-year-old son Clive was with his father at the time of the explosion and is still recovering from his injuries. At the Presbyterian Church in East Bridge Street, a minister read from notes Mr. Armstrong kept with his Bible. They referred to a mortar bomb attack on the RUC depot in Enniskillen.
4th of September 1985. Rocket attack on RUC depot in Enniskillen. Prayer. God's miracle. 16 rockets, but nobody was killed. Got very ill. Nervous tension and headaches, crying, and so on. 25th of September 1985. 2:30 a.m. in bed, asked God for help, asked him to come into my life as my Savior and friend, and to forgive me my sins. God did, and has been my friend ever since. Something really happened to me that night. I became a new person filled with the Holy Spirit. I received a complete deliverance from my sinful ways. God forgives and forgets sin.
After the service, the RUC band led the funeral cortege through the streets of Enniskillen and past the War Memorial. During his police career, Edward Armstrong had been the driver of the former Unionist leader, Harry West.
He was on guard duty at my residence for quite a while, up until 1974, whenever he was transferred in to drive me in the car, and he drove me from about 1974 to 1979. But I must say I couldn't have wanted a more loyal and faithful friend in every respect. He conducted me through many dangerous situations, and probably more dangerous than I was aware of at the time. But even during his time on guard at our house, he was regarded as a family friend. He and his colleagues became very close to our children, and indeed all our children came home today for the funeral, and our 4 sons indeed asked for the honour of carrying his coffin at the funeral.
This afternoon, Samuel Galt, a retired police sergeant, was buried after a service at St. Macartan's Cathedral. There, the Church of Ireland Bishop of Clogher, the Right Reverend Brian Hannon, said even in the communal agony, he had experienced seeds of hope. People from every background, in and out of uniform, had made superhuman attempts to rescue the injured and the dying. He had seen faith expressed and love practiced that had astonished the outside world. He was convinced that Remembrance Sunday 1987 in Enniskillen could be a turning point in the history of Northern Ireland. It could be the crossroads in the province's years of communal strife, to which historians would look back and say that was the catalyst. 3 victims of the Remembrance Day bomb were buried today. The community mourned. 3 families suffered terrible grief. Tomorrow there will be more funerals.
This morning in Enniskillen, a special meeting of Fermanagh Council was held in the town.
The Army, of course, has the expertise to sweep, jam and detonate remote-controlled devices by using high-frequency radio signals. That kind of operation is done only in evacuated areas where the threat of booby traps exists. But the IRA's admission of responsibility for Sunday's explosion suggested also that an Army UHF signal could have set the bomb off. An Army spokesman said the IRA claim was being regarded with the greatest possible contempt. And the RUC said the IRA were pathetically trying to defend the indefensible. The security forces have no doubts about the sophistication of the IRA's. If indeed radio remote-controlled, could have been set off by a signal accidentally compatible coming from the security forces' radio equipment. There still remains the possibility that the bomb was linked to a timer, which went off exactly when the IRA planned, or which detonated the bomb prematurely. What there is no doubt about is the fact that the bomb was designed to kill, and had been placed in an area where each Remembrance Sunday civilians had gathered for over 50 years.
Money has been pouring in for the Enniskillen Bomb Appeal Fund launched yesterday for the victims of the explosion. The fund opened to receive donations today. Another reminder of the address for those donations, it's the Ulster Bank at 16 Darling Street, Enniskillen. A spokesman for the bank has said there's been a good response so far. Money can also be paid in at any bank.
And a young nurse. A day of mourning, said one church leader, when a shattered community was united in grief and in love. Also tonight, in the Birmingham bomb case, the scientific evidence that convicted as the people paid their last respects to 3 of the victims of the bomb, which shattered their lives 2 days ago. Darling Street Methodist Church was packed, and so was the road outside, as Mary Wilson, a nurse and, at the age of 20, the youngest of those who died, was laid to rest. In his address, the minister said she was a caring girl full of vitality. She brought sparkle into all our lives. A few hundred yards away, Ted Armstrong, a reserve police officer who was 52, was buried with full police honours. At his funeral, the vicar described him as a typical Fermanagh man, an unassuming, uncomplicated Christian. Then, this afternoon, they also laid to rest Sam Galt, a retired policeman who was 49. The mourners there heard a defiant message to the terrorists. The loud report of their bombs will never unite the land.
48 hours after the Remembrance Day bomb, the people of Enniskillen set out to remember and to bury the victims. The first ceremony of the day was in the Methodist Church for Mary Wilson, the youngest of the 11 to die. Her father, Gordon Wilson, was buried with her under the rubble, but he was one of those who survived with minor injuries. Mary Wilson was a nurse looking forward to her 21st birthday, and prefects from the grammar school she'd left not so long ago were in the congregation to join in a service of thanksgiving for her life. The church was not big enough to take all who came.
Being of such a radiant, lively personality, she had immediate rapport with all the patients that came under her care. Her friendliness, her sense of humour, her sincerity won for her many friends among staff and students.
Enniskillen looked to this first funeral of a popular young woman murdered with others at the threshold of her adult life to embark on its days of public mourning and to try and dissolve what sympathies there may be for terrorists who bomb indiscriminately. There are 2 more days of such funerals to come. The IRA attacked the Royal Ulster Constabulary's depot at Enniskillen with rockets 2 years ago. Constable Edward Armstrong survived it, and the notes he kept at the time were read aloud at his funeral today.
16 rockets, but nobody was killed. Got very ill, nervous tension and headaches, crying, and so on.
But Edward Armstrong was, after all, to die 2 years later at the hands of the terrorists. And today, his colleagues bore his body past the sunlit wreckage of the Civic Centre, the spot where he died instantly in an avalanche of rubble. He was off duty at the time, joining with the little crowd opposite the War Memorial to see the Remembrance Day parade. His son, who was standing beside him, survived. Sam Galt was a policeman too. He retired 18 months ago after years as an instructor at the training depot in Enniskillen. And he too was standing with his son, who also survived when Sunday's bomb brought his life to an end. For this last funeral of the day, the rain had returned to Enniskillen.
As the mourners made their way to the funerals, a group of 8 Republican politicians were meeting in the town. They're members of Fermanagh District Council. The council chairman is Paul Corrigan of Sinn Féin, the IRA's so-called political wing. The Republicans and 4 SDLP councillors stood for a minute's silence. Mr. Corrigan read a statement expressing condolences to the bereaved. Unionist members of the council boycotted the meeting. At one of the funerals, Canon John McCarthy said how strict
didn't spare herself. I think that the fact that she was led into nursing, in this way she found an expression of that caring and interest in other people.
The service over the several thousand mourners followed the cortege through the heart of Enniskillen and past the funeral of another bomb victim
Reserve Policeman Ted Armstrong. A funeral service was going on in Enniskillen Presbyterian Church as the Wilson funeral went by. And only yards further on, the cortege halted momentarily at the cenotaph where Mary and the 10 other victims died on Sunday. Mary was later buried in a cemetery on the outskirts of Enniskillen.
The funerals of 6 of the victims will take place tomorrow. Georgina Quinton will be buried after a service at Garvery Presbyterian Church. The funeral of Kit and Jessie Johnston will take place at Scott's Presbyterian Church. Wesley Armstrong and his wife Bertha will be buried after a service at Darling Street Methodist Church, while John McGaw will be buried after a service in a funeral parlour in Ballymena. The last of the 11 people killed, William and Nessie Mullen, will be buried in Enniskillen on Thursday. As the first of the Enniskillen dead were being buried, hundreds of people in Dungannon attended an hour-long vigil at the town's war memorial. Unionist and nationalist alike stopped work to congregate at the cenotaph. All of them stood in silence in sympathy with the bereaved and injured. Other towns are planning similar demonstrations tomorrow, including Belfast, Green Island, Carrickfergus, Whitehead and Ballyclare. Unionist leaders have called on people in other towns to hold similar acts of remembrance.
The Catholic hierarchy in Ireland has reacted to the Enniskillen massacre and other recent terrorist outrages by urging its people to shun the men of violence and publicly show the revulsion of what's been done in the name of Ireland.
There has never been such an indictment of Republican violence from the Catholic bishops of Ireland.
Said that a vote for Sinn Féin was a vote for violence, bitterness and barbarism. Prince Charles. The 3 funerals today were those of the student nurse, Ms. Marie Wilson, a retired policeman, Mr. Sam Galt, and a police reservist, Mr. Ted Armstrong.
The town of Enniskillen was in mourning today for the victims of Remembrance Sunday. At the War Memorial, they were removing the last traces of the murderous bomb attack, launched without warning by the Provisional IRA. The streets were still and eerily silent. Every shop closed as the town paid respect to the victims. Brief handwritten notices on every shop front, bearing witness to the outrage felt by every part of this community. The RUC and the Army were out in force this morning, checking the routes to be taken by the funeral processions. Sniffer dogs were used to check for explosives. The first service took place in the Methodist church in the centre of the town. It was for the bomb's youngest victim, whose coffin lay in the church overnight. 20-year-old Marie Wilson was a nurse at the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast. Her father was trapped in the rubble with her. Her last words to him, "Daddy, I love you very much." All the schools in the town were closed to allow the pupils to attend. The service was broadcast to the people of the town packed in the streets outside.
I saw the spirit of Barry in the casualty department of the Erne Hospital. I saw the spirit of Mary Wilson in the wave of compassion and practical caring that crossed over the religious divide as a shattered community came close together in love and succor for the bereaved and the injured. Though we sorrow today, make no mistake about it, though we sorrow today, we do not sorrow as people without hope. If I didn't believe that, I would have run away before I came here at 12 noon today.
Hundreds of people followed the coffin to the graveyard.
We would pay tribute to his courage, piety, with peace and security, without the wholehearted.
Then the cortege passed the actual scene of the massacre.
Because you have brought him back.
Mary's father said that he had forgiven the bombers.
And given him all the...
The second memorial service was for the RUC reservist Edward Armstrong. As well as family, friends and relatives, the service was attended by the Chief Constable of the RUC and the local MP, Ken McGuinness.
To this wounded congregation and other fellowships similarly afflicted in this torn town, I want to say that there is forgiveness, that there is healing, that there is restoration. Ted Armstrong was a friendly, typical Fermanagh man, a fisherman, always ready to give his catch away, a very decent, unassuming, uncomplicated Christian man.
Edward Armstrong was buried with full police honours. The cortege once again passing the scene of the massacre. The final funeral of the day, the former sergeant in the RUC, Samuel Galt. During the service, there was a strong condemnation of Sinn Féin.
We had 15,000 people voting for Sinn Féin in Enniskillen at the last election. This is a new kind of violence in Enniskillen. This has been an attack on men, women and children, violent, indiscriminate. And I hope that many of the people who voted for them will now realise that they've been voting for murder, for mayhem and for bitterness.
The Royal British Legion announced this afternoon that it will reschedule Remembrance Day in the town for a week on Sunday. David Chater, News at 10, Enniskillen.
Prince Charles made his phone call to the local hospital at Enniskillen at 9:30 this morning before the funerals took place. He told the survivor, Mr. Stinson, that he was shocked by the enormity of what had happened. Mr. Stinson said the Prince had seen the television interview with Mr. Wilson, the father of the nurse who died. Prince Charles had asked Mr. Stinson to express his sympathy to Mr. Wilson when he next spoke to him. Mr. Stinson said the phone call perked him up and he passed on the Prince's sympathies to other injured people in the hospital.
As 6 more of the cenotaph victims are buried. On Armistice Day itself, at the exact hour of 11 a.m., the dignity of remembrance for the war dead and the bomb dead was of paramount importance. The annual Remembrance service at Portora Royal School always features buglers echoing along the school cloisters. As the head boy placed a wreath at the memorial for past pupils who died in 2 world wars, the Remembrance Day victims, the townspeople of the school's hometown, were uppermost in the mind. The act of marking the tragedy that devastated Enniskillen and all in its hinterland is beginning to help the community emerge from the trauma. The contribution at Portora Royal School just before the funerals this afternoon has helped to set the mood.
With the tragedy that had struck his family, and from the church minister there were tributes to the couple.
People like Wesley and Bertha Armstrong can never be easily replaced in the life of any church and community. The loss of them is grievous.
The Reverend Armstrong was among those who carried the coffin. He had heard his brother described as a man of many gifts, who exercised them with a quiet dignity and humility. Mrs. Armstrong was described as quiet and unassuming, a lady of few words, faithful and practical in her Christianity. A few hundred yards along the street, the funeral took place of another couple, Kit and Jessie Johnston, members of Enniskillen Presbyterian Church. A former minister there, the Reverend Jimmy Hughes, said he could not believe that the hearts of those responsible for the appalling tragedy were unmoved by what had happened. And from the moderator of the General Assembly, there was an announcement of a special act of remembrance.
I'd like to make it known that This morning I have written to all the ministers in our Presbyterian Church requesting that this Sunday should be a day when we have two things. First, we turn the day into a day of prayer. And that secondly, we use the occasion, perhaps the morning service, to have an act of remembrance, expressing our sympathy for and solidarity with the congregation here and the family circles that have been bereaved. And so I trust that throughout our church on Sunday morning, there will be that act of remembrance in which the congregation spend a minute in silence and we remember those who have died this past weekend.
Mr. Johnston was awarded the British Empire Medal in 1981 for his work in the ambulance service. His wife had been a nurse. Today, ambulance men carried the two coffins past the scene of the explosion, a poignant reminder of the work done by the emergency services on Sunday. At Garvery Parish Church this afternoon, the funeral took place of Georgina Quinton. The Bishop of Clogher, the Right Reverend Brian Hannon, said he had an ever-increasing list of messages from both clergy and lay people, Protestant and Catholic, expressing their sorrow and support. People were searching for ways to show their concern. He said the bombing had been an assault on the whole community by warped and criminal minds with an apparently insatiable bloodlust. He thanked God that the overall community reaction had been one of revulsion, grief, caring and prayer.
In Ballymena, mourners gathered this morning to pay their last respects to another bomb victim, Johnny McGaw, a native of the town who, over the years, had made his life in Enniskillen. The 68-year-old bachelor was well known by Enniskillen people for his fundraising and charity work. He was often found standing by his bicycle, passing the time of day with anyone he met. He often visited the town's hospitals to comfort patients and read them scripture. The Reverend Russell Burney gave an example of Johnny McGaw's selflessness.
Bertie, that's Johnny's brother, went down to Enniskillen to get the body on Monday, and they made a search of Johnny's flat. And the only thing that they found in the flat which would help them at all was a wee tin box. And in the tin box were a few coppers and a £1 coin. And that, you know, sums up Johnny McGaw. He put no store by this world's wealth, and in actual fact was more involved in giving away whatever small amount he might have had. You probably know that he was a benefactor of the hospital. He would collect money for the comforts in the hospital, where he visited it on a regular basis, almost every night and certainly every Sunday afternoon. This was the kind of a person he was.
Do you think the British and Irish governments will now take the initiative and take the campaign to the terrorists?
Well, judging on past performances, I don't think they will. I think we will hear all the things that politicians have been saying in recent days, and the British government and the Irish government, with their limited resources, will make the appropriate sounds. But at the end of the day, I wonder what more they can do. It really depends upon the people of this land, Roman Catholics in particular, ostracizing the gunmen, putting them out of circulation, and joining with us in trying to make something of what is the most lovely country in the world. But whether that comes about or not, I will be very keenly interested. I know there's a desire on the part of many to do precisely that, if they're given the lead, and if they step out, and if we're given the lead, then there could be a great future as a result of this.
The victims of the Enniskillen bombing were remembered today in a series of services across the province. One of the largest gatherings was at the Cenotaph in the heart of Belfast city centre.
In Belfast, thousands of office workers and shoppers made use of the opportunity provided by today's lunchtime service to pay their respects to those who died in Sunday's bombing. Many shops closed shortly before the ceremony began. The city's Lord Mayor, Alderman Dixie Gilmore, and the Dean of Belfast, the Very Reverend Jack Shearer, led a procession of aldermen and councillors to the War Memorial. The Lord Mayor paid tribute not only to those who were murdered, but also to their families and the many injured in the attack.
We silently
in spirit, join hands with the bereaved and pray from our hearts for their comfort and health. Our thoughts are also with those who have been injured, some of whom are fighting for their lives. May the God of grace be near to them at this time.
In Ballymena, over 200 people attended a special service at the town's cenotaph. They were led in prayers by the town's deputy mayor, Alderman Maurice Mills.
We meet to salute the memory of our dead. And in this manner, pay our final tribute to them.
Also there was the DUP leader, Ian Paisley, who along with the Ulster Unionist leader, Jim Molyneux, had suggested that such services would give those who couldn't travel to Fermanagh a way of expressing their feelings. The grief of 3 Ballymena families was uppermost in the congregation's mind. 5 of the Enniskillen victims, Wesley Armstrong and his wife Bertha, Jessie Johnston and her husband Kit, and John McGaw, had relatives here. Workers at both Short Brothers and Harland and Wolff also held services today. Hundreds of Harland and Wolff workers attended a brief ceremony at lunchtime, led by the Free Presbyterian minister, the Reverend David McElveen.
If there is one message that comes out of Enniskillen, it is surely the message that all of us need to be prepared to meet the Lord.
Perhaps the most poignant ceremony was in Enniskillen itself, where the pupils and staff of the town's oldest grammar school, Portora Royal, gathered for the remembrance service they hold every year. Prayers were said for all those affected by violence and war, and especially for those bereaved and injured through Sunday's attack.
In their 70s were among the 11 who died in the no-warning blast. They were buried this afternoon after a service in the local Presbyterian church.
3 times this week, funerals have left Enniskillen Presbyterian Church as a result of the Remembrance Day bomb. Today it was the funeral of a husband and wife, William and Nessie Mullen. They had been devoted members of the church, Mr. Mullen an elder, his wife a member of the choir. The Reverend David Couples said the loss of the Mullins and the other people killed in the explosion would leave a gap in the church and the community. It would not be easily filled. The moderator of the General Assembly, Dr. William Fleming, paid tribute to the Reverend Couples for the work he had done this week. It was an experience that would have crushed some other men, but he had coped wonderfully and continued to comfort and minister to the people. Dr. Fleming said the most notable feature in the funerals this week had been the Christian faith of those who died and the strength of Christian conviction which had sustained their sorrowing friends. He trusted that the testimony of those who died and the Christian reaction of their friends might lead to the establishing of true Christian standards throughout the country. Enniskillen has buried its dead with dignity. Inevitably, the attention of the world will eventually move on, leaving behind a shattered community. For the people of Enniskillen, the days ahead will be difficult. Badly as a result of the bombing. Pupils were injured, including 15-year-old Stephen Ross, who's among those still in hospital. The principal, Ronnie Hill, seen here in the centre of his staff and pupils, was seriously injured in the blast. The vice principal says the whole school has been affected by what happened.
We are a very big school in Fermanagh, and many of our children would have been involved in the various organisations attending Sunday's Remembrance service. Many other children would have been there as spectators. So everyone would have in some way a connection. They would know people who were killed. All of us know people who've been badly injured and bereaved. And so the whole school in some way has been affected. Our headmaster was very seriously injured. 2 of our senior pupils are still in hospital. Our head girl's father is seriously ill as well, and we have past pupils who have lost parents and indeed a present pupil who has lost his father as well.
Today, from a school in Devon, there were letters of support. They were unexpected, but came as a welcome gesture from school children many miles away, who had been touched by the outrage of the Remembrance Day bomb. Late this afternoon, 15-year-old Stephen Ross spoke from his bed in Altnagelvin Hospital in Londonderry.
Well, I feel very well. The nurses and doctors have been great to me. I've just a little slightly sore in my right. I have a fractured pelvis in this leg, and this leg's broken down to the bottom. But it's plastered, and I can feel no pain at all in either leg. Now, thanks to this bit of frame here, my face is in one piece. Unfortunately, my teeth are wired together, so that's why my speech is a bit distorted.
And you're getting on very well with the nurses here?
Yes, well, I'd rather not speak about that.
Why do you say that?
There's some rumours going around.
What can you remember about that day?
Well, it was just hell. I was standing with my sister at the cenotaph and I hold her hand. I turned around, I saw everybody holding the wreath, that was going to lay a wreath. Turned around, saw a soldier standing there all laid up, taking himself up. That bang, explosion happened. Bang, I shouted to my sister. The night went black, it was complete blackout. I can't remember anything of that. Oh yes, I've heard army men shouting and screaming, people running them out all over the place. I could see clouds of dust. It just went black. I don't remember anything of that.
And his wife Nessie sang in the choir. Both in their 70s, they were standing beside the bomb when it exploded. They were likened to a father and mother of the community in their love and care. And thousands paid their respects to this popular couple. In front of the ruined community centre, a wreath was laid at the cenotaph. The Mullins' small grandson would have done so on Sunday, but was buried in the rubble. 4 days after that blast, there's unrelenting security here. And as Billy and Nessie Mullen were laid to rest alongside other victims of the IRA bomb, there's a genuine wish for a lessening of tension so the community can mourn and rebuild undisturbed. Simon Cole, ITN.
The wound in this town's heart no easier as this grim week progresses. Shops and businesses which had reopened this morning closed again as a mark of respect to Billy Mullen, the local chemist, and his wife Nessie, who were both in their 70s. Former Presbyterian minister in Enniskillen, the Reverend Ivan Hull, gave the address and spoke of his feelings on returning to the town.
As Margaret and I visited this morning and yesterday, people at home and in hospital, people we knew and who were our friends, we have felt something of the pain and the hurt that is everywhere. It is human to step back and ask, why?
For the Reverend David Couples, it was his third funeral service in as many days. He tried to find new words of comfort for yet more bereaved sons and daughters. The cortege passed the fashion shop owned by the Mullins' daughter Margaret. The funeral had to be delayed until she could fly home from a safari holiday which she'd won in a window display competition. Hundreds of letters of sympathy have been arriving for the bereaved families, many containing donations to the appeal fund, which now stands at £25,000. Among them a letter from Ain Gibb, the man who lost both his parents in the Hungerford massacre. He said he wanted to express his shock and horror at what he called this senseless act of violence. Meanwhile, 17 of the injured are still in hospital. Tonight, a special Mass will be held in St. Michael's Roman Catholic Church in Enniskillen, where Cardinal Thomas Sophie will say prayers for the victims. Last night, around 1,000 people of all religions and from all walks of life gathered to keep vigil at the War Memorial. The Lakeland town has buried its dead. Now the townspeople must gather up the threads of their shattered lives and look to the future. But today they can only look back at the images of Enniskillen's blackest week.
Special Gordon Wilson an emotional standing ovation as he arrived for the service.
For a total rejection of the men of violence. And there was a special welcome for Gordon Wilson, the father of nurse Mary Wilson, who was killed in the blast.
The 1,000 people packed into St Michael's Church for the special Mass gave Gordon Wilson an emotional standing ovation as he arrived for the service. The service was called to show the revulsion of Catholics at the killings, and Mr Wilson was praised from the pulpit for his forgiveness for the killers. And the Catholic primate, Cardinal Tommaso Fee, asked all Protestants for forgiveness for the IRA attack. Later, the Bishop of Clocker, Dr Joseph Duffy, urged all Catholics to take a new stand against violence.
After last Sunday, there can never again be any serious conviction that a campaign of political violence leads anywhere other than to moral corruption and loss of innocent lives. There is no longer any option for a believing, practicing Catholic. It is then a moment of decision for all of us. The way of violence has failed us. The way of violence has led to hate and contempt, has led us away from love. Being ambiguous about violence has helped to tighten the grip of real violence as the great oppressor of our people.
Town's sacrifice could help to end the sectarian hatred that has fueled the last 18 years of violence.
In a week when the world has watched Enniskillen bury its dead, the people of the town are still trying to take in all that's happened. The bomb left nobody untouched. The local papers on sale a day late in this shop because yesterday saw the funerals of the newsagent's murdered parents-in-law. David Couples, the new Presbyterian minister, lost 6 of his congregation at this place last Sunday. He's been consoling their relatives day and night since. But at the church, which has seen all those coffins carried in and carried out, he feels his hardest task is yet to come.
In the back of my mind is the question of this Sunday morning service. What will the atmosphere be like? What will the people's feelings be like? And most of all, what I'm going to say to them to help them to begin to reflect in the light of our Christian faith on the meaning of these events.
The Chambers family have been mourning their friends and counting their own blessings. One son, Stephen, escaped unhurt as those all around him were killed and injured. But twice a day this week, he's joined his parents on the trip to Enniskillen's hospital, where his brother Nathan, who's 15, is nursing a fractured leg and hip and thinking himself very lucky.
Everybody else is very badly injured. I got off lately. I'll be back in a couple of weeks, back up on my feet. Some people will take years to get back.
That's the crooks.
But the care that's been shown them this week, much of it from Catholics who they hardly know, has given the Chambers new hope for Enniskillen's future.
I feel really in my heart that things are definitely going to change after this terrible happening in Enniskillen. The Enniskillen name has been well known throughout the whole world, a regiment of soldiers. But now this new reminder, every time they think of Enniskillen, they'll say, well, that was the time that the violence stopped.
The boys at this Catholic school would like to believe that too. They already play regularly with young Protestant musicians, but this week senior prefects made a special trip to the Remembrance service at a Protestant school.
Our parents have been already
just have formulated their own political ideas, and they're hardly going to change. It's the young people who are just starting out in life. It's time that they realise that they are the people, they will be the leaders of tomorrow, and it's time they realise we just have to get on with their Protestant neighbours.
The scars may remain, but that's something positive to grasp at in a week when there seemed no end to Enniskillen's sorrows.
And now a look at the
last Sunday's bombing at Enniskillen. Catholics have heard a forthright condemnation of violence from their bishops, and they've been told any kind of support for the IRA is a sin. In Enniskillen itself, prayers for the dead were said in churches of all denominations.
There were no ceremonies today at Enniskillen Cenotaph, but among the poppy wreaths, a floral tribute to the 11 people who died here exactly a week ago. At every church in the city, prayers were said for the victims of last Sunday's explosion. Roman Catholics arriving for Mass also heard the Irish bishop's letter read to them, containing the Catholic Church's strongest condemnation of the IRA and their supporters. Enniskillen's Presbyterian Church lost 5 of its congregation last Sunday. Gordon Wilson lost his daughter, but says he hopes his heart-rending description of her dying moments will bring some good to the province. His Methodist church was full this morning. This family had made the 2-hour drive from Dublin. They wanted, they said,
among them representatives of schools in Enniskillen. The service was conducted by the leaders of the 4 main churches here, and the congregation joined in a declaration against violence, injustice and discrimination. The young people were told by the Church of Ireland primate that the future of Northern Ireland lies in their hands.
We've come to think of one of the most precious things any young person has, their future. And we have come to show the world that so far as we are concerned, we want a community free of violence, free of terror, free of murder, free of hatred.
The congregation gave him a round of applause. Earlier at Masses across the province, priests read a joint statement from the Irish bishops and Cardinal Thomas of Fee denouncing the IRA.
It is sinful to join organizations committed to violence or to remain in them. It is sinful to support such organizations or to call on others to support them.
A few people walked out as the statement was read, but the priest said the vast majority agreed with it.
I've been in touch with my priests in the areas where this has happened, and the message I get is that those who walked out very seldom walk in, that they're not normally in church. So it would seem that there was an organised and orchestrated kind of protest.
In Dublin, the Taoiseach Charles Haughey was among thousands who packed St Patrick's Cathedral for the first formal memorial service for the Enniskillen victims. Then at 6 o'clock, a moment's remembrance. Silent television screens showed a white dove of peace. As public transport came to a halt, motorists pulled to the side of the road and people stood for a moment's silent tribute.
The Prince and Princess flew into St Angelo Airport just outside Enniskillen. The airbase adjoins the local headquarters of the Ulster Defence Regiment, and as the royal couple landed, there was a heavy security presence on the ground. They were met by Ulster Secretary Tom King and given a warm welcome by the military personnel. Without any delay, they went straight to the Erne Hospital to visit victims of the Poppy Day bombing. Word had spread quickly around Enniskillen, and dozens of well-wishers turned out to see the royal couple at the hospital. Their presence here was clearly much appreciated by the townspeople. Inside, the princess was taken around the wards by hospital staff. Among the victims were 2 teenagers. Nathan Chambers sustained a broken leg in the explosion. But his pal Ian Carson was sufficiently cheered up today to ask for a royal autograph. The royal couple met Mr. Austin Stimson. Last week, Prince Charles telephoned Mr. Stimson to express his sympathy. The Princess spent time with one of the injured policemen. He's on the road to recovery, but an RUC colleague is still seriously ill in Belfast. The police in Enniskillen were never far away from the royal visitors.
For once they didn't, is that right? They all had to move fast, good. See, anyway.
And for the nurses, a special treat. The princess stopped to see a baby whose birth was delayed last week because of the emergency at the hospital.
Police and soldiers took up vantage points. By the time the royal couple arrived, a crowd had gathered and there was a warm welcome. 7 people injured in the Remembrance Day bomb are still being treated in the hospital. Among those introduced to the Prince and Princess were members of the medical staff. Accompanied by the Secretary of State, Tom King, they then went to the wards where they met people injured in the blast, including Austin Stinson, who spoke by telephone to Prince Charles the day after the explosion.
Austin Stinson had already spoken to Prince Charles. The Prince of Wales had been anxious to voice the royal family's feelings on the bombing as quickly as possible and had telephoned Mr. Stinson as soon as he was fit enough to talk to him. Mr. Stinson is still being treated for a broken leg he received in the bombing. The hospital was ringed by policemen throughout the visit. But neither the Prince nor Princess were going to be rushed as they chatted casually to all the injured. Two young boys, Nathan Chambers and Ian Carson, are still being treated in Erne Hospital. They described to the Prince what had happened to them 10 days ago beside Enniskillen's War Memorial. Both are now well on the way to recovery, and both certainly well enough to ask for a royal autograph. The Prince and Princess also spent time with hospital staff. Off-duty nurses and doctors had rushed to the hospital to help the 63 injured who were brought there after the Remembrance Sunday explosion. Within the last half hour, they left the hospital, but before the royal couple flew out of Enniskillen, they met with relatives of the 11 people who died, including Gordon Wilson, the man whose chilling description of his daughter Mary's last words to him as she lay dying in the rubble moved millions, not least the royal family themselves.
Nothing like it should ever happen again. Here's his report.
The demolition men are at work on Enniskillen's community hall, but the community itself is building for the future. There's a new determination here to wipe out the memory of the massacre and work together for an end to the sectarianism which has left hardly a street untouched by grief.
Lord Jesus.
The Girls' Brigade were due to have attended last week's remembrance ceremony. 5 minutes later, and the blast would almost undoubtedly have claimed some of their lives.
Help us, Lord, when other people are around us. Try to tell us that all Roman Catholics are evil and bad. Help us to remember that many of them are very good. The first few days, everybody was completely stunned. Then you went round and it was like a ghost town. You know that yourself, I'm sure. But after a time, people started to think about it, and I think perhaps the people who spoke on television, the bereaved folk, who were so close to God, and they were able to forgive the enemy, in inverted commas. They were able to have love in their hearts, and I think it challenged anybody who had ever made any kind of commitment to Christ in the past.
I don't know, I think I've been drawn closer to my Catholic friends. Some sort of a way, I don't know. It's just brought us slightly closer. We've been able to discuss what's happened, and we've realised it, and we've just come closer.
At the largest Catholic school in the area, everyone recognises the danger that after the funerals, memorials and Sunday's ceremony, community relations could slip back to where they were. There's a determination here too that positive steps can be taken.
After the feeling of remorse, you have to think of something constructive to do, and schools in general have become more closer together. There's a definite feeling of building that must be done within the schools.
This week, education chiefs from all denominations met to discuss ways of maintaining the momentum of good relations that followed the bombing. All schools in the area look set to close for a day so that staff can meet to discuss ways of reducing sectarian mistrust.
We have to have inbuilt into the curriculum an understanding of the lifestyle, the practices, the traditions of those who differ from us. And that is being done. Just last week I had a meeting with my staff, and I asked them in their own subject areas to see how and where they could include in the curriculum, particularly at the younger age level, opportunities for increasing a knowledge of the traditions and symbols of Protestants, of Unionists, of people who differ in some aspects of cultural life from us.
The eyes of the world will fall on Enniskillen this Sunday when the community finally honours its war dead. The people of Fermanagh County give more per head to the British Legion Poppy Appeal than anywhere else in Britain, twice the average in fact. But with at least 10 times as many as usual expected to attend this special ceremony, the Legion are aware of the danger that it might be hijacked by point-scoring politicians.
This is non-political. The Royal British Legion is a non-sectarian organisation, and anybody that talks religion in this room here, they're put out and they're barred. It's as simple as that.
The Poppy Day massacre has inevitably written an inglorious entry for Enniskillen in the history books. But it would be unfair to this rural and welcoming community if there was not at least a footnote to say the people sought to find good from evil.
Remembrance Day ceremony to begin. What remains of the old social club has been knocked down and the debris lies out of sight, boarded up. And tomorrow the people of Enniskillen are determined to do what the bomb prevented them from doing a fortnight ago, that is hold their Remembrance Day service and pay their respects to the dead of 2 world wars. But of course the bomb has added a greater poignancy to the whole occasion, and thousands of people are expected to be here tomorrow. I hope you'll join me for Enniskillen's Remembrance Day on BBC One at 10:30.
It exploded as hundreds of people packed into the tiny triangle around the War Memorial for this morning's remembrance ceremony. The Catholic Community Centre where the bomb had been left collapsed like a pack of cards on top of a group of 40 or 50 people, including children. As the huge cloud of choking dust caused by the explosion subsided, mothers called hysterically for their children, wives searched for husbands. Some found their loved ones, others didn't. Survivors tore at the rubble with their bare hands to reach the dead and injured.
All I seen at that particular time were people lying, crying. They were searching for relatives who were pinned underneath this particular wall. Now, the old school is surrounded by a metal girder, just as we have in this street here, and people that were standing beneath this wall had no escape because if they couldn't run forward because they were blocked by this girder. And apparently there were a number of people trapped underneath this.
One 10-year-old boy was blown down the street by the force of the blast and was later found wandering some distance away.
Everybody's running everywhere, and there's dust everywhere.
He didn't know where he was wandering about the street and some man brought him over to the house.
The RUC have opened a special incident room to coordinate their hunt for the bombers. The number there is Enniskillen 23451, and the police have appealed for any information which could help the inquiry. They particularly want to hear from anyone who saw anything suspicious at St. Michael's Community Centre over the past few days. The incident centre number again is Enniskillen 23451, or there's the confidential phone at Enniskillen 23040. Well, with me now are 2 men who were at the cenotaph when the bomb went off. Former
the glass breaking around you, falling masonry, people screaming, and then everybody rushed as soon as the dust started to clear to where the real casualties were. Fortunately, I was on the other side of the street at the time, but everybody was in a state of shock. It was a most horrific scene. That's all I can describe. I'll never forget it.
there was total pandemonium.
Absolutely. I mean, the sheer horror of the thing was that the people who were on the corner were in behind a pedestrian barrier, a steel pedestrian barrier, and when the wall came out, it pushed these people up against the steel pedestrian barrier, and you could see them up. I don't know whether they were alive or dead, but the scene was absolutely horrific.
How many people were actually gathered there for the annual Remembrance Day service?
Oh, well, it's always, I would say, around about, there's usually about 1,000, maybe 1,500 people would be around that, the cenotaph on Remembrance Day morning every year, and they all gather in the same places, and they all tend to take up the same places for vantage points for view. This is probably the most popular vantage point just at that particular corner.
We hear from Enniskillen that the death toll could have been considerably worse.
Well, it's bad enough as it is. There's no doubt if it had happened a short time later, there would have been a lot more people injured, and the casualties would have been worse. I don't know whether any more people would have been killed dead, because at that particular time, that corner was already packed full of people watching this. They were all old people. There were wives of men who were going to be on parade. There were children of people putting wreaths. There were retired people, old people, pensioners. All that sort of person was gathered there. And those people gather there every year. The same people gather there every year.
Mr. Burns, if I could turn to you, what was the immediate reaction of people at the cenotaph after the bomb went off?
Oh, I think everyone was just dazed. I think there was, complete confusion. I certainly didn't realize where I was for some time. And I know that I never want to go through that experience again. I'm deeply grieved for all the people who have been injured and for all the relatives of those who are dead. And I think that it's a great, great tragedy for many of us in Fermanagh who have been working so hard for a very constructive development of the community. And I know that all the people in Fermanagh, all decent people in Fermanagh, will certainly agree with me in that there.
Presumably you knew some of those who lost their lives and were injured in this attack?
Yes. I have to say that as a public servant, I serve the two traditions in Fermanagh, and every year I attend the cenotaph. And on this occasion, it just so happened that perhaps I changed my route of attending, and but for that, I think that I would be dead now. And it's miraculous that I'm here, really. Now, all the people that I know many people who have attended, and I have to say that they're all good people. I have never seen any of those people ever at all involved in anything whatsoever that could be described, for example, as sectarian. They're all good people, and many of them that are dead, we'll miss them very much in Fermanagh. And I know them personally, and I'm very, very sorry.
How quickly were emergency services at the scene to sift through the rubble looking for survivors?
Well, I have to speak in admiration, really, of the police in particular who were there, and the way in which everyone moved in immediately to try to help. The emergency services came into action very quickly, and I think also that the hospital, I know, is packed out. I understand that they've had to ferry some of the injured out by helicopter to other hospitals. But I believe that they responded extremely well.
Mr. Ferguson, what would you say to the perpetrators of this atrocity? What's your message and the message from the people of Enniskillen this Remembrance Sunday afternoon?
Well, I have no doubt that the message will go out from all the people of Enniskillen that they're absolutely appalled at the enormity of what has happened. And it's difficult, certainly I find it extremely difficult to conceive of any furtherance of any political cause. May I say this about the media, though? And it needs to be said. The person that you should be talking to today isn't Raymond Ferguson, the official unionist councillor. It's the chairman of Fermanagh District Council, who's Paul Corrigan of Sinn Féin, and there's 7 other Sinn Féin councillors. Your camera should be going around to them, asking them what they have to say about it, because that's where the real news story is. You know what my reaction is going to be.
Raymond Ferguson, Jerry Burns, thank you both very much indeed.
Well, there's been a wave of condemnation and expressions of sympathy in the wake of the atrocity. The Queen was told of the massacre just after the Remembrance service in London. Downing Street officials say Her Majesty was deeply shocked and asked that her heartfelt sympathy be given to the relatives of the dead and injured. The Prime Minister, Mrs Thatcher, said the attack showed the appalling depth of callousness of those responsible. Labour leader Neil Kinnock said it was a new depth of vicious cowardice. It was an atrocity against ordinary people, honouring those who fought to get the very freedom that terrorism wanted to destroy. Irish Premier Charles Haughey said he knew he spoke for every decent Irish man and woman in expressing his anger and revulsion at those who planned and carried out what he called this act of carnage. Northern Ireland Minister John Stanley described the attack as barbarous and contemptible. He said anyone with information or suspicions regarding those responsible should contact the police. Cardinal Tommaso Fee said the attack was heinous and appalling in its utter brutality. Those who planned it, carried it out, or gave willing assistance in its execution were guilty of murder most terrible. Archbishop Robin Eames, the Church of Ireland primate, was preparing to conduct a remembrance service at St Macartn's Cathedral in Enniskillen just before the bomb explosion. He said people had deliberately placed a bomb where it would cause the most carnage. No one in society could excuse that. The Presbyterian moderator, Dr. William Fleming, said that the spirit which motivated this brutal massacre was so inhuman it could only be called satanic. The act would only strengthen the resolve of people to resist the demands of violent men. Local politicians have joined in condemning the attack. The SDLP at their annual conference passed an emergency resolution expressing horror and revulsion. Sympathy was extended to the bereaved and injured, and the party called for those who carried out the attack to be brought to justice immediately. DUP leader Ian Paisley said it was a diabolic deed carried out by hell-inspired monsters. He said the killers didn't deserve to live and called for capital punishment to be restored immediately. Alliance leader John Alderdice said it was an appalling act of barbarism and that the perpetrators should be given no refuge or hiding place. Seamus Lynch of the Workers' Party said the outrage was a savage horror that would strike fear into the heart of every civilised person in the community. Sammy Wilson of the DUP said there were people in the community who knew the killers. Silenced by this few condemned the whole of the Republican section of the population, he said. RUC headquarters said words were inadequate to describe the carnage and that condemnation was inadequate to describe the sheer barbarity meted out to fellow human beings. The Sisters of Mercy in Enniskillen have unreservedly condemned the attack and offered deepest sympathy to relatives of the dead and injured. The Ulster Clubs movement has called on Mrs Thatcher to send in the SAS to bring the terrorist killers to justice. A statement issued this afternoon said that this was done in the Falklands and that widows and orphans in Northern Ireland demanded no more and no less. Commenting on the explosion, the Sinn Féin chairman of Fermanagh Council, Paul Corrigan, said Sinn Féin councillors were shocked and regretted the deaths and injuries. He said their party was in a vulnerable position because of its principle of opposing British rule. He and his colleagues did not expect to escape the consequences of the explosion, even if the IRA weren't involved. He said Sinn Féin stood firm against those who would try to exploit the outcry for their own party political interests. A diabolic deed by hell-inspired monsters. That's how the Democratic Unionist Party described the attack. The party rejected what it said was the crocodile tears of political opponents and predicted that the government would do nothing to stop such vile deeds. East Belfast MP Peter Robinson summed up the party feelings when Ray Hayden talked to him a short time ago.
Well, I don't think that there are any new words in the vocabulary of terms of revulsion that anybody can use. No one can be surprised that the IRA or their fellow travellers would carry out such an atrocity. I think the only surprise is that we find ourselves taken unaware at the depths to which the IRA can stoop in carrying out murder and mayhem in our community. Clearly it's a very dark day for Ulster and particularly for the people of Enniskillen.
In your view, is there anything that could have been done by the security forces to prevent this kind of massacre?
Well, I don't think anybody can blame the security forces. I think certainly, though perhaps this isn't the most appropriate time to detail it, but certainly those who are responsible for giving guidance to the security forces, who issue the instructions for the security forces, they have got it wrong, clearly have got it wrong. They are operating a policy of compromising and appeasing terrorism. The Anglo-Irish Agreement itself was a response to that kind of sop that's given to put terrorism out of the way. It doesn't work. It's been very costly by way of a policy. The numbers of deaths and the amount of destruction has substantially increased since the Anglo-Irish Agreement, and therefore that policy should be buried. and I would have thought that it's obvious that we need to have a policy of resolutely pursuing the IRA and those who think like them, a policy of cornering the IRA, catching the IRA and making sure that they're put behind bars if indeed we don't do what we should do, which is having capital punishment for carrying out of these kind of dreadful capital offences.
Your party has attacked those who have condemned this atrocity and has actually urged politicians, your opponents, to withhold their, what you call their crocodile tears on this occasion. Is this the right time for political recriminations?
Well, of course, nobody listens to us at any other time, and that's one of the sad facts about Ulster. The television cameras across the world are turned on when we have this kind of incident, and the only opportunity that Ulster people have of expressing their horror and revulsion at what's happening and of informing the community outside of Northern Ireland of the events that we have to suffer in this province is to speak at a time like this. And when I hear the like of Charles Haughey putting out a statement with his condemnation and how much he's going to do, it really does make me have to bite my tongue very hard. The extradition that is being sought from the Republic of Ireland is to bring to book people who are responsible for this kind of murder, yet Charles Haughey won't give it without having a price tag attached to it.
Peter Robinson, thank you very much. The SDLP interrupted their annual conference in Newcastle to pass an emergency resolution expressing horror and revulsion. The party called on those who carried out the atrocity to be brought to justice immediately. I'm joined now by the party's deputy leader, Seamus Mallon. Seamus Mallon, the reaction, first of all, of the party and the party leaders and the delegates at Newcastle.
Numbed. It was during one of our party conferences a number of years ago that we heard of the murder of Robert Bradford, a fellow politician. I thought we experienced a great numbness then. This was much, much worse. Because people realized the enormity of this. Number one, men, women and children who were mourning their dead, who were praying for their dead, were slaughtered in this way. Now, not only is this murder, it is also sacrilegious murder. And I think that offends everybody within this island and on this earth who believe in the right of people to worship their God in peace. That it happened on a Sabbath, I think again, is something that is revolting to Northern Irish people. And I think what we said in the emergency resolution at our party conference was that we condemned it without reservation, that we offered our sympathy to the bereaved, and could I take this opportunity of expressing on behalf of the Catholic community our deepest sympathy with the Protestant community, because we realize that the majority of people who were killed and injured in that incident would have been members of the Protestant community. And on behalf of the Catholic community, I offer that sympathy with the utmost sincerity that I can muster, because this was a sectarian attack. Because of the nature of this Remembrance Day service, the people who planted this bomb knew they were going to be killing members of the Protestant community. It was an absolute sacrilegious, sectarian, savage murder.
Were they trying to bomb the Anglo-Irish agreement out of existence?
I don't know what they were trying to do, but I would hope that one thing would come out of it, and I have said this so many times and over so many years. I would hope that people would realize that when it comes to suffering in the north of Ireland, that the Northern Irish people, be they Catholic, be they Protestant, be they people of no religion, have got our great sympathy with their fellow people in the north of Ireland, because all sections of the community knows what suffering is about. And today is another episode in that. And I would ask people in the north of Ireland who would not agree with me politically, and who maybe would have attitudes towards our political position, I would ask them to accept that we realize what they are going through on this day, and we realize the extent of the suffering that they are enduring, because we ourselves have endured it for so long too.
Not a time for political recriminations then?
I don't think it's a time for political recriminations at all. I think it's a time when the most we can do at this present moment of time is offer that sympathy in the most sincere way and accompany it with the absolute resolve, political resolve, to ensure that those who committed this crime are brought to justice immediately.
Seamus Mallon, thank you very much. One of the first on the scene of the explosion was local MP Mr. Ken McGuinness. He spoke to Jeannie Johnston.
Bombing this morning?
As in all the deaths that have taken place in my constituency over the years, and there are now something like 190, almost 200 people dead through terrorism, it's one of shock and horror. But I'd be lying if I said it was one of surprise. what occurred to me as I drove down from my own armistice service in Knocknatloy after hearing of the news today was that in this town we have a so-called political party called Sinn Féin who will actually glory in the slaughter that went on this morning. They will not repudiate those who have done this. We will have a community which is unable, or part of a community, a large part of a community which is unable to surrender those who perpetrated this act to the due processes of the law. Of 170, or more than 170 IRA deaths, only 14 have been resolved through the courts. Those are my immediate reactions. Obviously, as I begin to make contact with the individual families where the tragedies have occurred, my feelings will tend to be ones of hopelessness, because there is no likelihood after a day or two that anybody will remember what has happened here this morning. And I wonder, I'll go tomorrow to Westminster, and my colleagues there, the Prime Minister, will express their horror and their disgust. But they will do nothing. When they go back to their constituencies for the weekend, they will go back to constituencies where they haven't lost 190 people through terrorism. And I'll come back here to await further slaughter, knowing that government will do nothing about it.
Just to recap on the massacre in Enniskillen, police have confirmed that 11 people have been killed and 55 injured, some seriously. The no-warning explosion happened as people were gathering for a remembrance service at the town's war memorial. The bomb had been planted at the nearby St. Michael's reading room, and many people were buried as the building collapsed. 6 men and 5 women were killed, and children are known to be among the injured. There'll be further updates on the Enniskillen massacre on ITN at 6:30 and 9:10 this evening, and in Ulster Television's closed-down bulletin shortly after midnight. Downtown Radio, by the way, will be updating the situation on their news bulletins every hour.
That special edition of Ulster News Time replaced our advertising
about their daily business, still numbed as the full horror of yesterday's bombing was pieced together and news exchanged about the dead and injured.
I don't know what words or what I could say about it, only it's just terrible to do such a deed.
Terrible. I think they must have no conscience at all to do something like that.
2 funerals, including that of the youngest victim, 20-year-old Mary Wilson, will take place tomorrow. The remaining victims will be buried on Wednesday and Thursday. Shops and businesses in the town will close as a mark of respect. Meanwhile, the RUC Chief Constable Sir John Herman has said the bombing marks a change in IRA tactics.
They have been dealt very severe body blows recently by the
Seems so much. Monday morning in November, it would be a quiet day in the little town of Enniskillen. This morning, it was utterly quiet. No traffic flowed through the junction where the war memorial stands. Only a few shops were open, and policemen and watchful soldiers paced about the wrecked building, awaiting the experts who would analyze what was left of it, eventually to determine the size and type of bomb it had been, whether it was detonated by remote control or timed to explode, as close to 11 o'clock on Sunday morning as its devisers could make it. The Northern Ireland Chief Constable's remark that the bomb was aimed at civilians was no routine condemnation. For more than 50 years, the town's elderly, the women and children who came to watch the annual Remembrance Day parade, used the broad end wall of what was once a school, then a community centre, to shelter from the first chills of winter as they waited. They were crammed onto the narrow pavement, contained by a permanent steel barrier mounted along its curb. In Enniskillen, as in the rest of Northern Ireland, there's been no gathering of curious onlookers from either the town itself or the surrounding countryside. Only those who have business here gaze on the scene of yesterday's horror, and even they do not take long about it. But amid the grieving, there's an openness, a willingness to speak of the moment when the work of Northern Ireland's most pitiless bombers reached its dreadful climax.
When I heard the explosion, the bomb went off, I never thought of my children. I thought of other people who would be there. And then one of my eldest girl told me that My son-in-law and the 4 children were there.
Many times the IRA has struck at soldiers and policemen in Northern Ireland, claiming that civilian casualties were an unfortunate side effect. No such claim has been or could be made in Enniskillen, but this atrocity has failed to drive a wedge any further between Catholic and Protestant. The only real anger is anger at those who could do such a thing.
The 11 people killed were all from Enniskillen. Among them were 3 married couples. William Mullen, a retired chemist of 73, and his wife Nessie Mullen, who was 70. Wesley Armstrong, who was 63, and his wife Bertha, 53. And Kit and Jessie Johnston, who were both 70. The others were Samuel Galt, a retired policeman of 49, Edward Johnson, an off-duty reserve policeman who was 52, John McGall, aged 68, a caretaker, Georgina Quinton, who was 72, and 20-year-old Marie Wilson, a nurse. 6 of the dead were members of the Presbyterian Church, which stands a few yards away from where they were killed. Their minister, the Reverend David Couples, joins us now from Enniskillen, along with Bishop Brian Hannon of the Church of Ireland. Mr. Couples, when something as terrible as this happened, it takes about a day for it all to sink in. How do you judge, moving around that tightly knit community, the feelings of people in Enniskillen today?
Well, I visited as many of the families as possible yesterday. I haven't been able to see any of them today. And the overwhelming emotion is simply one of shock and sadness. I haven't sensed any bitterness or anger, and simply an amazement that this kind of thing could happen to people that we knew and loved so well.
Bishop, how long do you think it will take the community to recover after this atrocity?
In a way, I don't think you recover from any one trauma or disaster in Northern Ireland, because we're constantly dealing with the same sort of problems. Somebody asked me this morning, how do we deal with something on this scale? But it's the same scale to every individual. And if somebody has been murdered, or somebody has been bereaved, or somebody is suffering, that is the one person that you're looking after at that moment. And David's congregation, in this particular case, has had the trauma of 6 members. I mean, his church is only around the corner from here, and we were waiting at the other end, half a mile down the main street, for the parade to come to the Remembrance Day service. So this has been a joint ministry from really a complete and a together community, and that's what we've been trying to keep it.
Mr. Couples, can I ask you, as you've been around the members of your congregation, many of them grieving, how you find solace yourself after an incident of this kind to enable you to give sympathy to them?
Well, first of all, to use a verse which I quoted to the congregation last evening, it comes from Psalm 46 and says that God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in time of trouble. And I have found God to be sufficient for me at this time. And also the members of the congregation are wonderful. They're a very closely knit community, and they're ministering to me, I think, just as much as I'm ministering to them.
Mr. Couples, Bishop Hannon, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As we've heard, the youngest victim was Marie Wilson, a 20-year-old nurse who was visiting her parents for the weekend from her job at the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast. Her father, Gordon, who was trapped in the rubble with his daughter, says he bears no ill will or grudge towards her killers. This report from John Thorne.
Marie Wilson was a student nurse at what she called the best hospital in the world, the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast. She was home for the weekend to be with her parents, and yesterday she travelled with her father the short distance to the cenotaph ceremony in Enniskillen.
It all started at 10:30 when Mary and I left here. And you won't believe this, but as we drove over the bridge, just past the War Memorial, it seemed to me that that whole area was very exposed, and I said to Mary, I sure hope the police looked under that bridge last night or this morning. And we went down and we parked the car and we came back, walked back. And we stood with our back to this building, which I understand contained the bomb. Spoke to half a dozen or 8 people whom I later know are dead. On the way in, found a spot to stand. We were there 10, 15 seconds at the outside. Bang.
In the confusion and chaos, rescue workers tried desperately to find the victims. Under the debris, Mr. Wilson realised that his daughter was trapped right beside him.
And then I was aware of somebody squeezing my hand. And Mary said, is that you, Dad? And I said, yes.
Sing a song, sing this song for Christmas.
The students came from the 8 secondary schools in the town, both Catholic and Protestant. They were accompanied by members of 2 families bereaved on the 8th of November, the Mullins and the Quintons.
We're just trying to salvage anything we can, and we don't want them to have died in vain. And it's just the whole idea of looking to the future and everything, that we don't want this to happen again.
It can't have been easy to be in that studio today.
Well, in a way, it's probably easier now than if it happened a month's time, because we're sort of still in a bit of a daze. So things are probably a lot easier now than they would be if we had to do them later on.
What thoughts have been going through your mind as you've been singing that song?
I just thinking about what my mother would have thought of all this.
What do you think she would have thought?
I think she'd be pretty overwhelmed by it.
I have heard the record, and I've enjoyed listening to it, and I can't see that any harm can come from the record going out to the world.
You don't think it's cashing in on other people's tragedy?
I don't think so, not on this occasion.
We're cashing in the sense that every penny of this is going to the appeal fund, the Enniskillen Appeal Fund, and I'm quite prepared that people will do that and that will come back. But let's say the positive feedback from the people concerned directly, from anybody we've talked to, various clergy, even politicians, is 100% positive, and they're all behind it.
I would hope that people who have offered their sympathy and so forth in the last fortnight would lend their support to it as well.
And buy the record.
And buy the record.
Sing a song, sing this song for Christmas. Tell them all to love so we'll be free.
The song was written by a Fermanagh man whose UDR father was murdered by the IRA in the 70s.
Sing, sing a song this Christmas. Let's love together so the blind can see. Sing a song, sing this song for Christmas. Tell them all to love so we'll be free.
30 children from 8 Enniskillen secondary schools, Protestant and Catholic, united in harmony today to record the song Love to be Free. Chris Quinton, a son of Georgina Quinton, who died in the Poppy Day blast, played bass on the recording, while his sister Aileen and his brother Ian helped out on the vocals. The recording was at the Splash Studios at Dundonald, which is owned by 2 Fermanagh men. One of the owners, Johnny Saunderson, who wrote the song for Enniskillen, has painful memories of the Troubles himself. His father, who was in the UDR, was murdered by the IRA.
My father was murdered by the IRA in 1974. I can tell you that I had a lot of very, very negative feelings. I can quite understand a lot of people feel the same way. A lot of negative feelings after that. I mean, hate, bitterness, all those sorts of things which only destroy a person inside. Recently I've come to realise that is not the way to take these things on. That's why I like to think in this song we're getting across the message, this is the way forward. We're looking to the future here. The way forward is not fill your heart up with hate and bitterness, let's hit back. Let's fight, let's love to be free is the message. So you've got to love, we've got to show a wee bit of love to our neighbours, let's get together. But this is a message for the whole world, it's not just for Northern Ireland, it's coming from Enniskillen, that's the pertinent point. It's for the whole wide world if they want to listen.
Now, what would you say to people who would accuse you of exploiting the situation?
Well, I've got an answer for them. I'll say, yes, we are exploiting the situation, but we're exploiting it for a very, very good cause.
Perhaps surprisingly, the song contains no direct reference to what happened in Enniskillen, but that met with the approval of relatives of the victims.
I think the song itself is really good because it's not specifically to do with Enniskillen. It sort of can be used by anybody and at any time, and I just hope that it'll do something.
The musical director on the record is also organist in St Macartn's Cathedral, venue for last Sunday's moving service in Enniskillen.
I've certainly never played anything like it. It's very, very fraught. This is quite light compared to everything that's happened. This really is jolly and the kids enjoy it, which is the main thing. It's for the young market.
I think it may for quite a lot of people bring memories flooding back, but for most people it'll be something nice for them to listen to at Christmas. I think it's great. It should do well.
Couple of pubs next time?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
The organisers now plan to send their tapes to an English record company. They hope they will distribute the record worldwide, raising thousands of pounds. The organisers say that all the money they raise will go to the Enniskillen Appeal Fund. That now stands at £237,000.
Relatives who were at today's recording believe the song will be a hit.
My mum loves singing, and there couldn't be a nicer tribute. And Mary Wilson as well, I believe, she sang, and I think for them it's lovely.
You think your mum would have been
She
pleased
would
with
have
this?
very, very pleased, and just hope that this message will go out to the world, and people will not forget, and that we can all live in peace.
She would have quite enjoyed it. In fact, there were times today in the studio I sort of forgot myself and thought I'll give her a ring home to see if she watches the programme in the evening or whatever.
Sing, sing a song this Christmas. Let's love together so the blind can see. Sing a song, sing this song for Christmas. Tell them all to love so we'll be free. Sing, sing a song this Christmas. Let's love together so the blind can see. Sing a song, sing this song for Christmas. Tell them all to love so we'll be free. Sing, sing a song this Christmas. Let's love together so the blind can see. Sing a song, sing this song for Christmas. Tell them all to love so we'll be free.
In the wake of the Remembrance Day atrocity,
As Protestant and Catholic school children throughout Fermanagh enjoyed their unexpected day off, their teachers met to discuss ways of bringing them closer together. About 500 were at the conference in the Killyheaven Hotel to look at ways of strengthening mutual understanding. The conference was arranged by the Western Education and Library Board, but was the brainchild of school principals in Fermanagh.
Well, when the principals met, a number of initiatives were considered for ways in which we could go forward and promote mutual understanding within the curriculum. And it was felt that if teachers were going to do this, they themselves would have needed an input. Now, it will probably be necessary for children to have an input as well, or pupils in the schools. But initially, if we can get teachers working together, the practicality of teachers may influence the kind of ideas that will come forward, and hopefully something tangible will come out of it. I personally feel that the future of our community lies with the young people. And if we can get people to realize that they have very, very few differences, that they can work together, that they can play together, that they can perhaps go to discos together, without trouble, without violence, and they can talk and communicate, I think that's the future for young people.
What I would hope is going to come out of this, there's going to be inbuilt into the curriculum of the school an understanding of the practices, the traditions, the beliefs, and the aspirations of people from other denominations or other political traditions.
How are the teachers getting on inside today?
Actually, it's a lovely experience because in the group now that I'm with, 8 people there, many of them I have not met before, and we're just talking and we're sharing ideas and sharing aspirations, and it's very enjoyable.
As teachers considered the future, someone gave an untimely reminder of the present with a bomb warning telephone call. The hotel was evacuated, but a short time later the all clear was given and the teachers were back round the conference tables. Bringing the younger generation in Fermanagh closer together is the essence of this conference. Teachers here today feel education could have no more relevant or noble purpose. As the conference went ahead, the Enniskillen Appeal Fund, being collected at the town's Ulster Bank, reached £251,000.
I'm quite overwhelmed, John, because initially when we launched this fund, it was intended to give people an opportunity to identify with us, and in that respect, there has been a massive response.
How is it going to be spent?
We will respond and help those who are bereaved and injured, and in that respect we don't want to see anybody going untended. Secondly then, I think that there's a general feeling that there should be some form of memorial. And thirdly, after we have met the needs of all the people who have been bereaved and injured, and I do emphasize that, we'll then be looking to see if there is anything over, that we will put that towards what we call a community trust.
2 weeks after the IRA bomb which killed 11.
On the day before Enniskillen's postponed Remembrance Sunday service, troops and the IUC virtually sealed off the town. Every square inch has been checked for explosives. Front yards and garden hedges, any place where a device could be planted. Sewage outlets and drains near the route of the procession. Sniffer dogs on the river leading towards the war memorial. And underneath the memorial itself, a team of divers searched the muddy bottom of the River Erne. Amongst the debris they found a traffic cone blown off the bridge by the IRA bomb. Sniffer dogs were sent in to St. Macartan's Cathedral, which will be packed with 700 people for tomorrow's service. Every pew was double-checked. At the local barracks of the Ulster Defence Regiment, they were having a final rehearsal for tomorrow's parade. Most of them were there when the bomb went off and helped pull the injured out of the rubble.
Expressions on the people's faces who were trying to escape the scene as we met them were terrifying.
I don't feel too bad at all. It's just all come back to me, you know.
One of those who won't be at tomorrow's parade is 16-year-old Stephen Ross, confined to a hospital bed with a steel cage round his face to hold together the bones shattered by the IRA bomb. His morale has been helped by the hundreds of cards sent to his bedside by well-wishers.
And I'd like to thank them awfully for all the cards and everything else they sent was terrific. The reception, like, from people, so many people I didn't know.
Would you like to be at the Remembrance Day service tomorrow?
Yes, I'd love to have been honest. It's just a pity I'm in the situation that I couldn't go to see it.
Thousands of people are expected to arrive in the town for tomorrow's service. They're coming from all parts of the country, both north and south of the border. They're coming to remember the dead of 2 world wars and the victims of the IRA bomb. David Chater, ITN, Enniskillen.
A former unionist councillor...
All the nursing staff. For weeks after the Enniskillen explosion, his face was in a wire frame, but the hospital challenged him to get well fast.
It's been terrific, actually. It's done a world of good to me, and I'm really speechless. I couldn't say anything that would thank the doctors and nurses for all that they've done. Just like to thank them really, really, really much.
Stephen still has a broken leg which must mend, and he knows he'll have to accommodate mentally to return to the town where he nearly died on Remembrance Day. 2 other victims of the terrorist bomb remain in hospital under intensive care, but Stephen is pleased he met the challenge to get home for Christmas. The Ross family are overjoyed that Stephen is coming home, but their thoughts are with the 11 other Enniskillen families whose loved ones died in the Cenotaph explosion and will never be home again.
Those are the words of Gordon Wilson, whose daughter Mary was the youngest of the 11 who died in the Remembrance Sunday bombing. But he says hearts have been softened, and for the first time differences of history and faith are being put aside so that Protestants and Catholics can join together in prayers and celebrations. Triona Holden reports in the first of a special series for the 9 o'clock news, highlighting some of the people who've touched the hearts of so many this year. It's 6 weeks now since a terrorist bomb shattered the lives of the people of Enniskillen. They are going through the motions of preparing for Christmas, but this year the shops aren't as busy as usual. With people still numbed by what happened, the festive spirit is muted. Even the Christmas lights have somehow lost their glitter. For those like Gordon Wilson who lost loved ones, Christmas will never be the same again. He touched millions of people when he told how his daughter, Mary, a nurse, held his hand when they were both buried by rubble from the blast. Her dying words to him were, "Daddy, I love you very much."
I think what helped me was the fact that Mary's last words were words of love. And that put me on a plane, and I was more readily able to talk about love rather than hate. I have to say that I was never so aware of the tinsel and the hoo-ha-ha of Christmas as I am this year. And those things, quite honestly, seem so unimportant now. It seems to me, and I suspect to the folk in Enniskillen, the real values of Christmas are coming through this year.
It still will be, I would have thought, a difficult time, because Christmas is a time of the family, a time when perhaps your thoughts go to those who aren't with you.
We mean to have a quiet Christmas. To be honest, we thought of going away for Christmas. We decided, and I think rightly, to stay home. And it will be a quiet family Christmas. Different, that's for sure. But Christmas, and I think we'll enjoy it. I've no doubt we'll enjoy our Christmas, if that's the right word to use. Hearts, I know hearts have been softened. Attitudes have changed. This has to be good. If enough people's hearts have been softened and enough attitudes have changed, then maybe Mary's death would seem a little more worthwhile, and we might, just might, be nearer peace and reconciliation in this country.
Christmas thoughts of Gordon Wilson, and that's the 9 o'clock.
For visiting the grave where his daughter Marie is buried. But despite the royal tribute for his forgiveness, Mr. Wilson modestly declined to talk about the Queen's speech. Elsewhere in the town, the faithful came to church still bearing the wounds of the IRA bomb. Amongst them was Stephen Ross, whose face and leg were shattered in the explosion. Some, though, were still too ill to attend church. 68-year-old Dora Thompson, who sustained multiple fractures, was allowed home from hospital 2 days ago. She waited today to hear the Queen's speech, but afterwards she and her husband said they could not forgive the killers who planted the bomb. Wreaths today decked the town's war memorial. A few feet away where the bomb exploded, a lone bunch of Christmas flowers marked the spot. Terry Lloyd, ITN, Enniskillen.
It's just terrible to do such a deed.
Terrible. I think they must have no conscience at all to do something like that.
3 funerals, including that of the youngest victim, 20-year-old nurse Mary Wilson, will take place tomorrow. The remaining victims will be buried on Wednesday and Thursday. Shops, businesses and schools in the town will close as a mark of respect. The Chief Constable, Sir John Herman, has said the IRA are becoming increasingly careless and regardless of the community. And a short time ago, the IRA admitted responsibility. Stories were told and retold today of how survivors dug in the rubble with their bare hands to reach people trapped when the wall of the community centre collapsed on top of the Remembrance Day crowd, and of how medical and emergency services worked tirelessly to help the injured. And there was sadness over the list of victims, mostly retired people in their 70s and 80s, and the young student nurse. In such a small town, every family is touched by grief. Meanwhile, donations have been rolling in for an appeal fund set up to help the bereaved and injured.
It really, as I understand it, is an attempt to give people an opportunity to make a gesture of support towards the community in Fermanagh. And to some extent, it's as a result of many calls that we've received, both from home and abroad, asking in what way can people help. We've received calls from Germany and from England. In particular, I can say that our twin city of Bielefeld in Germany, they are very anxious to participate and to support us in this here.
Details are emerging of an injured 16-year-old's heroic deeds in the aftermath of the Enniskillen blast. Julian Armstrong ignored his own injuries to tear away the rubble that had entombed his parents. But Julian's efforts were in vain. His 62-year-old father, Wesley, and his mother, Bertha, were dead on admission to hospital. There's been an endless stream of reaction to the atrocity, but all that has been said pales beside the simple words of one man, Gordon Wilson, a father mourning the death of his daughter. 20-year-old Mary Wilson, a nurse at the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast, attended the Remembrance Day ceremony with her father. They were standing close to where the bomb went off. Both were buried under 6 feet of rubble. Gordon Wilson relived the agony of what happened in the immediate aftermath and talked of those who perpetrated the cenotaph slaughter when he spoke to Ivan Little.
I'll never forget it. We left here 10:30, and oddly enough, as we passed the war memorial and over the bridge, I said to Mary, I hope the police have checked out this bridge. It looked very exposed. They had, as it turns out. We parked the car and we came back. I spoke to 8 or 10 people 7 of whom are now dead. We walked past them. We found a place with our back to the building that the bomb, I understand, was in. And I said to Mary, "Are you all right there, dear? Can you see?" And she said, "Yes." And the bomb went off. It didn't seem such a very loud explosion, but we knew it was a bomb. We weren't hurled across the road or propelled. I, for one, and I can only speak for myself, was pushed forward on my face into loose sort of rubble, but no heavy blocks or stones. I think Mary must have got those. And then I felt somebody take my hand. And Mary said, "Is that you, Dad?" I was so pleased. "Are you all right, dear?" "Yes, fine." Then she screamed, "Are you all right, dear?" "Yes." "How are you, Dad?" "I'm fine." Then another scream. Then I said, "Mary, how are you? Are you all right?" She said, "Dad, I love you very much." Those were her last words. The whole thing lasted 5 minutes. I was pulled away, got out, said to the boys who pulled me out, "Fellas, for dear's sake, my wee daughter's over there. Go get her." And no doubt they did. And she's in a better place. No bombs, no bullets. And I think if she hadn't died, she could well have been a cripple, to say the least of it, all her life. The fact remains it's still very hard to take. Why a man like me of 60, who's had a reasonably full life, should be left, and a young lassie at 20, a pet, should be taken. I can't understand that.
What about the bombers, the people who planted this bomb? What do you feel about them at this moment in time?
Right now, neither my wife nor I, nor any of the family that I'm aware of, bear them any ill will. Maybe we get around to it, but right now, there's no anger. I prayed for those bombers last night, and I meant it. We worried about Mary up in Belfast, up in the Falls Road and wherever, as you know, the Royal Victoria is in the centre. And it seems odd that she should come back to lovely Fermanagh, be killed in a bomb.
The funerals of 3 of the victims, including Mary Wilson, are expected to take place tomorrow. A service for Edward Armstrong will take place at Enniskillen Presbyterian Church, while the funeral of Samuel Galt will be held at St Macartan's Cathedral. Mary Wilson's will take place from Enniskillen Methodist Church. The funerals of 5 of the dead are scheduled for Wednesday. They are Wesley and Bertha Armstrong, Georgina Quinn and Kith and Jessie Johnston. The other victims, William and Nessie Mullen and John McGaw, are expected to be buried the following day. Protestant and Catholic schools in Enniskillen will be closed tomorrow as a mark of respect, although pupils sitting O-levels should attend as usual. The Chamber of Commerce has also decided that shops and businesses in the town will be closed.
We had a very well-attended meeting this morning, representative of practically all the tutors in the town. And it was decided unanimously that all shops would close tomorrow.
For the full day tomorrow?
For the full day tomorrow, and for the times of the funerals on Wednesday and Thursday. Some shops also expressed a desire to close this afternoon, so we have left that to individual tutors. We realise, of course, that there are certain people like chemists and banks that can't close, but apart from that, I would visualise that the town will be practically entirely closed.
Of the 63 people injured, 20 are still in hospital and 5 of those remain very seriously ill. Everyone's been praising the work of the Erne Hospital and the way its staff coped in the emergency.
13 people are still detained in the Erne Hospital, where all the injured were rushed after the explosion. 6 of them are described as ill and the remainder are in a stable condition. A further 7 transferred yesterday to other hospitals are also still very seriously ill and in intensive care. 3 men and a 15-year-old boy in Altnagelvin Hospital, a man and a woman in the Royal Victoria, and another 15-year-old boy in Belfast's City Hospital. And the manner in which the Erne coped with its biggest ever emergency was reviewed at a news conference today.
I think it's important to put on record that the staff, and I mean all of the staff, were absolutely magnificent in the way that the situation was handled. It certainly did create pressure on the hospital, there's no doubt of that. But there was never at any stage disorganization or chaos. We did not need to actually ask any of our staff to come in. Staff just appeared, in all types of staff. And as well as our own staff appearing, we actually had a number of people who work in hospitals elsewhere in Northern Ireland, but who came here to help us out.
Dr. McConnell went on to list the types of injury that confronted his staff.
Chest injuries, multiple fractures, serious facial injuries, skull fractures. Most of the injuries appear to have occurred because masonry came down in one piece, rather than lighter masonry flying about the place. And amongst the patients certainly that we have seen and had to admit and had to transfer elsewhere, the injuries really relate to crush injuries from heavy masonry falling and trapping people. What I would hope is that the community here in Fermanagh will not be judged by the wider world simply on the fact that this incident occurred yesterday, but rather that they'll be judged on the effort that they put in to deal with the aftermath of that tragedy.
The Commons at Westminster has held an emergency debate on the Enniskillen massacre, during which Mr King pledged that the mass murderers would be sought with all means possible, and he believed with the increased cooperation of the authorities in the Republic. But Northern Ireland MPs were angry at the impunity with which people from Fermanagh had been systematically killed over 17 years. And the SDLP's refusal to fully support the police came in for much criticism. Here's a brief selection of the comments during the hour-long debate.
There is a deep sense of anger and outrage felt throughout Northern Ireland today. I know that there will be many who will call for retaliation. I say to them most urgently that they must not be provoked. Further acts of violence will only play into the hands of the terrorists and make more difficult the task of the security forces. What we must do instead is to determine that every possible assistance is given to the RUC and the security forces in their continuing fight against terrorism, and in particular to bring those responsible for this atrocious crime to justice.
I'm doubly devastated to hear the statement that came from the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland this afternoon. It is an insult to this House yet again to come here and offer platitudes. It is a total letdown for my suffering people. And he would be much better this evening coming here and demanding from everyone in Northern Ireland, including the SDLP, that they can no longer get away with simple condemnations of violence, but rather that they must accept responsibility for the welfare of the community in which they live.
He will have noticed in my statement that I did say that this was a time for everybody to give their full support to the RUC and the security forces. I say that very clearly indeed, and I look to every party in this House to play their full part. This is a time when there's no halfway house. There is no chance of deciding whether you sit on the fence on this one. Against terrorists of this depravity and this viciousness, those who aren't for us are against us.
The choice of an occasion like yesterday, when people were commemorating the dead of 2 world wars who come from every section of every community of both islands, was a coldly calculated choice to stir and hit at the deepest emotions of the Unionist people and of the British people. And it was the deepest act of provocation against the Unionist people that has taken place in my lifetime. And I would sincerely hope that no one would fall into the trap that has been laid by retaliating, because the doctrine of an eye for an eye leaves everybody blind.
Sinn Féin President Gerry Adams issued a 39-word statement about the bombing in which he extended sympathy to the families and friends of those killed and injured. He said, "I do not try to justify yesterday's bombing. I regret very much that it occurred." Sinn Féin said Mr Adams was not making himself available for interview today. In the aftermath of the Enniskillen massacre, police had to be called to Belfast City Hall this morning as Unionist councillors stopped Sinn Féin members entering a committee meeting. No arrests were made after scuffles at the council chamber doors. In Fermanagh, Sinn Féin councillors managed to get into a committee meeting, but it was adjourned as Unionists said they couldn't sit with what they called the guilty men.
Official Unionist councillors were in angry mood as they gathered for talks this afternoon before the council committee meeting. The talks about what tactics they would adopt were held at the offices of the Fermanagh Unionist Association, only a short distance from where the IRA bomb exploded yesterday. The Unionists wouldn't discuss what they were planning or how they would react if Sinn Féin councillors turned up for the meeting at the town hall. Despite what happened this morning at Belfast City Hall, where Sinn Féin councillors were barred from entering a meeting, Sinn Féin councillors in Fermanagh turned up for the meeting, but they were saying nothing. Mr Corrigan, after what happened in Belfast, have you any qualms about going into the meeting? The meeting of the Technical Services Committee was over within minutes.
The meeting has been adjourned sine die. This committee meeting has been adjourned sine die. What did you say, Mr Ferguson, at the meeting? I asked for a vote of sympathy with all the bereaved, and we got that with all the council members present at that time. Including Sinn Féin? Sinn Féin didn't turn up for that, but they turned up for the proposal and voted for the proposal. Why don't you interview Sinn Féin? There's 4 Sinn Féin councillors in there, and you should be putting the world's cameras on Sinn Féin and asking them for an explanation of yesterday's happenings. There shouldn't be Unionist councillors. Everybody knows what Unionist councillors think. I want to see you wait outside this door until Sinn Féin come out and put your microphones underneath their noses and ask them for contributions about what happened. We're fed up condemning this. Let's see them. Let's see the guilty men come down those steps and answer your questions. The whole world wants to see that.
When Paul Corrigan, Sinn Féin chairman of Fermanagh Council, came out of the town hall, he refused to talk about yesterday's bombing. Mr Ferguson has branded you one of the guilty men. How do you feel about that? Have you anything to say about that? Mr Ferguson.
Mr Corrigan, 24 hours after, you changed your mind about who was responsible. I mean, is that why you're not saying anything?
Excuse me, keep away from the car, please.
Well, as we heard from Westminster, amongst the MPs there was Fermanagh Unionist Ken McGuinness, who has since been to meet the Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Mr McGuinness now joins us from London. Mr McGuinness, we heard your reaction to Tom King's statement in the Commons. You've since met the Prime Minister. Are you any happier now?
Well, insofar as the Prime Minister spent over an hour with the group of us who went to see her and listened very carefully to what we had to say, then obviously we are pleased that that meeting has taken place. We took the opportunity to air many of the grievances that the people of Fermanagh and South Tyrone have. We made points about the deployment of troops, about the need for resources. We certainly made very strong point about the obscenity of Sinn Féin in the councils with the Armalite, or as in the yesterday's.
A wonderful lady. Wesley Armstrong, a great man with a great voice to praise the Lord, and his wife and family were a credit to the whole community. And Kit Johnson, a great man of God, he at one time was an ambulance driver, and the whole country will miss Kit Johnson and his dear wife, who served in the county hospital and later in the Erin Hospital too. Ted Armstrong was a great friend of mine, a great man, fisherman, and a friend of all the ministers who ever came to Enniskillen. The whole county of Fermanagh knows John McGaw because he proclaimed the gospel from the Diamond and from many other places. A very godly fellow, and very sadly missed. And Mrs. Georgina Quinton, she was a nurse, native of Donegal. And too, she was a lady well respected and a wonderful help to many people.